Today is Sunday, October 9th, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. A friend yesterday or the day before asked if I would take some time on a walk to think about the topic of infallibility as it relates to the Catholic Church and to the to the papacy. And I find this an interesting topic to get into, but I'm not going to get into it from the angle that most of the modern contentious arguments approach it from. What I'd like to think about as a Catholic man is what does it mean for the Church to be infallible? Why is it important for me? And how does it actually help me to become more holy, more Christ-like? So let's think about this question of infallibility. First of all, let's just make it clear that the word infallible means unable to err. Unable to go astray. It's infallible. Unable to go astray. It doesn't mean that it's not simply saying that one has never gone astray. It's not simply saying that one is true. It's saying that it is impossible for one to err. That's what it means to be infallible. So impossible or incapable of going astray. The Catholic Church is infallible. And we have to ask, where do we get this idea from? On what grounds can we believe and trust that the Catholic Church is infallible? And the ground for this belief is the promise of Christ himself. Christ himself said, when Peter confessed him to be the Son of God, Christ said, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." So Christ, at that moment when he was confessed by St. Peter, responded with a promise, two promises actually. The first part of this promise was that he himself would build the church upon St. Peter, upon the rock. And some people debate, well, is he saying that he'll build the church upon Peter, or is he saying that he'll build the church on the confession that he is the Son of God, he is the Christ? And the answer is both. They're both true at the same time, in the same place. Peter was the first to confess that Jesus is the Christ. Peter was established not only by the fact of his confession as the first to confess, but he was also the one to whom Christ said, "Upon this rock." And we can't deny the significance of Peter's name meaning the rock. It's just silly to try to explain that away. Peter's name wasn't Peter after all, it was Simon. Jesus named him the rock. And Jesus said, "Upon this rock I will build my church." That's the first promise. And the second promise is that not only would it be built, like the temple of Solomon, which was also built, but that the gates of hell would not prevail against it. And this is a very peculiar promise. It's a very strange promise. I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. It's a very strange promise, because if we think about it, normally when people quote that passage, they quote it as if it means, I will build my church and it will withstand all of the attacks of the enemy. But that makes no sense if we look at what it actually says. The gates of a city keep invaders out, and the strength of the gates determine the strength of an enemy that can be protected against. Jesus is talking about the gates of hell. And he says, the gates of hell will not prevail against my church. He's not saying the church will be protected from all attacks. He's saying something greater than that. He's not saying that his church is going to be this city that is able to withstand all of the attacks of the evil. He's saying more than that. He's saying hell will not be able to withstand the attacks of my church. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Nobody's attacked by gates. Gates are a means of defense. The church is on the offense in that promise. He guarantees the victory of his church. On this rock I will build my church, and it will be victorious. Jesus promises that he himself is the builder of the church. He will build the church, and he promises us that it will defeat his enemies. This is the same message that we find in the book of Revelation. We find this promise that the gates of hell will not prevail against the Christian church. We find this expanded upon through the vision that our Lord gives to St. John in the book of Revelation. We see the final victory. And the purpose of that message is to give us confidence. It's worth noting that in warfare, when we talk about whether or not a war is just, one of the qualities, or one of the criteria, I should say, one of the criteria of a just war is that it's winnable. For a war to be just, it has to be winnable. Otherwise, it's just suicide. We have to know that we can win. We have to have hope that we will win before we undertake any battle. We have to know that we can win. Jesus warned about this in the Gospels. He said, what king, before he enters into a conflict, does not first take time to count the costs and consider whether this battle will be winnable? If it's not winnable, then he should seek to avoid the conflict. For us to enter into this conflict, we have to have hope that it's winnable. And Christ tells us Christ promises us that not only is it winnable, but we will win. Of course, if we fight. So in that place in the New Testament, Christ makes two important promises. First, that he will build his church on the rock. And secondly, that his church will win this battle against evil. And he makes these promises based on his own divine power. On this rock, he doesn't say, men will build my church. He says, I will build my church. And he promises that the gates of hell will not prevail against that church which he will build. So we have these two promises, and it's worth noting that the promise that the church would be victorious is joined to the promise that Christ, the single head, will build his single church upon a single rock. And through all of church history, that has been understood to be teaching that Christ established Peter as the chief of the apostles, as the pope of his church on earth, to establish a focal point for the unity of the church. That the unity of his church is embodied in Peter and in each of Peter's successors. The unity of the church, the oneness of the church, is personified in the Pope. On this rock, I will build my church, and this unified, divinely powered church will be victorious over hell itself. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. And it's here that we have this assurance of infallibility. It would make no sense for Christ to build his church upon this rock and then have that rock become the source of the error of the church and actually cause the church to be overcome by the powers of hell. It would make no sense for Christ to say, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. It also makes no sense to try and argue that human imperfections will cause the church to fail, because it goes without saying that St. Peter was a man full of imperfections. Peter was a man who was by no means presented to us as a perfect man. We see him stumbling and fumbling throughout the Gospels, making all kinds of mistakes, not understanding things, making poor judgments, having to be corrected, even rebuked by our Lord. It's to Peter that Jesus actually says, "Get behind me, Satan." And yet, despite all of Peter's recorded errors and mistakes, he is chosen to be the foundation stone, the rock on which the church is built. And in the book of Acts, we see these two things continue. We see Peter continues to struggle We see Peter's human imperfections continue, and yet we see him clearly established as the rock upon which the church is built. We read in St. Paul's epistles that there was a conflict in the early church, and we have to always remember the historical context of this. We're talking right at the time of St. Paul's conversion. Very, very early, in the first years of the church, St. Paul is converted by a miracle, by a vision of Christ himself that's given to St. Paul. And St. Paul is faced with a confusing situation where it appears that Peter is contradicting the teaching of the gospel. And St. Paul says that he had to rebuke Peter to his face concerning this error. And he was right in doing so. And we continue to see Peter working through his human imperfections while yet serving as this visible head of this visible church on earth, established by Christ, being built by Christ. And we can say, yeah, well, Paul rebuked Peter. Jesus converted Paul. Jesus sent Paul to help Peter. And the mark of a wise man is not that he has all the answers figured out. A wise man hears instruction and becomes wiser. And we see Peter corrected by his brother Paul, not by some self-appointed YouTube guy, not by some arrogant layperson, but by a man chosen directly by Christ himself, given miraculous graces and sent to help the church. He helps Peter. And Peter responds and leads the church faithfully. Peter was struggling with the details of the gospel because they were being revealed in his life real time. Remember the story where Peter was saying midday prayers and he received a vision saying, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." And Peter, being a Jew, responded and said, "No, I will not eat. These are unclean meats. The law says I shall not eat these things." And in the vision, he's told, "Do not call unclean what I have cleansed." And this reality, this mystery of the gospel that St. Paul talks about, that Gentiles would be joining the Jews in this Christian religion, this was still being revealed to the apostles, real time as it happened. Jesus said to the apostles before he ascended, he said, "I have many more things to teach you, but you cannot bear them now." The revelation was still in progress. It was being revealed to the apostles. Note, it was being revealed to Peter, as it was unfolding in time. And it was to Peter that the first Gentile convert came and received the sacrament of baptism. We could say, therefore, that the entire church of Gentiles, all Gentiles who have ever been baptized, had their first baptism from St. Peter himself. God revealed this to Peter and to the church through Peter. That's what the Pope is. That's the papacy. Peter was struggling to understand what these things even mean, because they were being revealed to him. He was the man on the front line of divine revelation. His struggles should not surprise us. But what should be clear to us is that the truth was being revealed to Peter, through Peter, the head of the church. Peter's human imperfections in no way contradict this. In fact, they make perfect sense when we consider the fact that the man to whom new revelation is being given would be struggling to process it all. And yet in the book of Acts, we find Peter rising up to take leadership in the church. The church was built upon and through St. Peter, Christ's chosen vicar, the prince of the apostles. The revelation of the mystery of the gospel was made first through St. Peter. He was the first to witness the Holy Spirit being poured out upon Gentiles through the sacrament of baptism. That revelation was given to the Christian church through St. Peter. So this goes back to Christ's promise. You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. I will build my church on Peter, which we see happening in the book of Acts, and the gates of hell will not prevail against this church which I build upon the rock. Now, the victory of the church is guaranteed by the promise of Christ himself. He himself guarantees the victory of his church. There's no condition. There's no if you this, then I. There's no condition. This is a promise without condition. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Christ himself is the power and wisdom and salvation of the church. He doesn't make the church dependent on human strength or human wisdom. He says, I myself will build this church upon this rock, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And he further reveals the doctrine of the church by saying this: the world will know that you are my disciples by your love for one another. The world will know that you are my disciples by your love for one another. Through these two passages of Scripture, Christ makes it very clear that the church will be built upon the rock of St. Peter, the visible head of the visible church, and the church will be recognized in the world. We talk about the marks of the church. This is the ultimate two marks of the church. One, I could say this is the mark of the true church, is that it is one. It is unified by love in the person of St. Peter and his successors. So when we say the four marks of the church are one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic, what we're really saying is the church is one in St. Peter. The oneness of the church, obviously the first mark is one. The second is holy. There can be no holiness without love. By this all men will know that you're my disciples, that you love one another. Holiness also is impossible without obedience. Catholicity, the fact that the church is Catholic, simply means that it's universal. It's not limited to a particular place or people, any tribe or language. There is one church, and it is a global church. It's one of the reasons why I think it's bizarre that so-called traditional Catholics criticize Pope Francis for being a globalist. The Catholic Church is globalist. That's what it means to be Catholic. He is obligated, he can't favor a particular nation or pretend that he himself is a nation. The Catholic Church is a spiritual institution that is nevertheless visible on earth and interacts with all of the governments and nations of the world. Every government with its different political system, different legal system, different culture, different economy. The Catholic Church has to deal with all of these different circumstances, and that the prudence that's needed for those relationships, that's the primary responsibility of the hierarchy of the church. But the church is Catholic. It is one and global. All of the churches of the earth unified in their head. And it's apostolic, meaning ultimately that it traces its origin back to St. Peter. And through St. Peter to Christ himself. But we can summarize, in simple layman's terms, the 4 marks of the church with just one mark. It's unified in St. Peter and his successors. And it will never fail. Christ has promised us that his church, which he built in Peter, will never fail. And this is what it ultimately means to be infallible. This is what it ultimately means to be infallible. Now, if the church was attacked by all kinds of temptations and delusions and overcome in Peter by those delusions, it would fail. Therefore, it's impossible that the church can ever be overcome by the temptation of the powers of hell. It can never be overcome. It can never be deceived and misled, led away from Christ, who is the builder of the church himself, who has personally guaranteed the victory of the church. It can never happen. And anyone who suggests that it could happen is not saying something against a pope, because a pope is a human being who still retains concupiscence through original sin, but also all of his own human imperfections, just as St. Peter did. To say the church has failed is a direct denial of Christ's promise, and is directly a judgment against Christ himself. It's essentially saying Christ has failed. Hell has prevailed. Anyone who suggests that the church has erred, which means it has been overtaken by any enemy, whether human or spiritual, anyone who suggests that the church has been overtaken by the enemy claims that Christ has failed. Now, the Protestants tried this 500 years ago. The Protestants tried to claim that the church had apostatized. The Protestants claimed that the Pope himself was the Antichrist. This is stated explicitly, or at least it was stated explicitly in the teaching of, I think it was the 39 Articles of the Anglican Church. I think it was either the 39 Articles of the Anglican Church or it was the Westminster Confession. One of the two Protestant statements of faith identified the Pope as the Antichrist. This would mean that the rock on which Christ built the church had been overcome by the devil. And like I said, it's a judgment against Christ that he has in fact failed and lost this battle against hell. Now, of course, the Protestants, realizing the implications of their accusations against the Pope and against the Catholic Church, had to scramble to come up with some sophistical explanation for how this could be true. And so they came up with a couple different explanations. First of all, they said, well, when Christ said, "I will build my church," he wasn't speaking about a visible church on earth. He was speaking about a spiritual church, an invisible church, made up of the true believers, known only to him. And so there is no actual visible church on earth. There is simply a community of souls who truly believe in Christ, who are known to Christ, that live in the world. And this invisible community of true believers known only to God, that's what it means to be the church, the invisible church. So the Protestants denied the existence of a visible church. They denied that when Christ said, "I will build my church," they denied that he was talking about an actual earthly institution with a visible leadership and membership. And second, and inasmuch as they denied that, they also denied the papacy. They deny the whole hierarchy of the church. They deny the priesthood. They deny any visible elements of the Christian religion. They deny that there were any successors to Peter. Many Protestants even deny that Peter was established as the chief of the apostles in anything more than some kind of necessary preferential order, but that there was no formal hierarchy established by Christ. There's no physical, visible hierarchy on earth. Christ alone is the head of the church, and it's invisible. It's all invisible. So that's how the Protestants explained how they could call the Pope the Antichrist and yet not deny Christ's promise that he would build his church and that the gates of hell would not prevail against it. And they also explained the passage where he says, "On this rock I will build my church," to refer only to the confession that Peter made, that Jesus is the Son of God, and not to Peter himself, even though Christ named Peter the rock. It's a very, very implausible attempt to explain away the obvious consequences of separating themselves from the one holy Catholic Apostolic Church, an implausible attempt to justify dividing the church, separating themselves, and calling the Pope the Antichrist. But they had to do that in order to get around this idea of infallibility. So what they said is that the human leadership of the church was fallible, but the church itself as an invisible community of believers known only to God, that was what was actually infallible, which makes no sense, of course. And what we'll notice if we look at the so-called traditional Catholic movement today is that it's really teaching the same thing. The Pope has erred. Some, the sedevacantists, will say there actually is no Pope because the papacy has apostatized, so there's no Pope anymore. And a necessary implication of that belief is that the living popes are actually antichrists. So they're really saying the same thing that the Protestants are, because if Pope Francis, for example, is not in fact the vicar of Christ, but says that he is the vicar of Christ, then he does exactly what the Antichrist is said to do. He stands in the place of God as a vicar of God when he is in fact not the vicar of Christ. So these sedevacantists are essentially identifying the Pope as the Antichrist, just as the Protestants did. They are basically accusing Christ of having failed to resist the attacks of hell, even though that's not even what Christ said. He said not only would they resist the attacks, but they would overcome the defenses of hell itself. But they accuse the church of having succumbed to the powers of hell, being overtaken by the powers of hell, now being without any successor to St. Peter. They deny the entire promise that Christ made to his visible apostles standing in front of him when he made those promises. And how do they explain this away? They move towards the doctrine of an invisible church, which is what the Protestants did. The living, visible hierarchy of the church is not the true church according to them. There is no true, visible papacy any longer according to the sedevacantist. The church, or the papacy at least, has become something invisible, if not completely destroyed, just like the Jewish priesthood. God has forsaken this temple of the new covenant, which Christ himself said he would build and would lead to victory. They're saying, no, that actually has not occurred, but it has actually been overcome. And they have all kinds of conspiracy theories and explanations for how it was overcome. It was the Freemasons, it was homosexuals, it was communists, on and on, all of these different conspiracy theories for how the church was somehow overcome and destroyed, contrary to Christ's promise that it would never be destroyed. Further, they accuse the Pope of heresy, which is even more bizarre, because, as St. Thomas Aquinas explains, heresy has as its essential meaning division. Heresy, in its Greek origin, expresses the idea of dividing or separating. The Latin equivalent to this idea of a heresy or heretics would be a sect, from the Latin word sectare, which means to cut off. So we have this idea of cutting off and separating. That's the idea of heresy. How can the successor of Peter, in whom the unity of the church is personified, how can he be called a sectarian or a heretic? How can he be called one who separates himself? He himself is the living, visible sign of the unity of the church, built by Christ upon the rock of St. Peter, guaranteed to overcome the powers of hell. How can the Pope, who is the source of the unity, be accused of being separated from the church? It's very bizarre, if not impossible, for the Pope to be accused of heresy. In fact, it's impossible because of the definition of the word itself. It's impossible that the Pope can be a heretic. Now, if one wished to accuse the Pope of being a heretic, or a Pope of being a heretic, one thing he could possibly try to argue is that the Pope has separated himself from his predecessors. That would make sense. If someone argued that the Pope, in his teaching, in his beliefs, separated himself, cut himself away from his predecessors, then it might make sense to accuse him of heresy, of leading a sect, leading people away from the church, which would be embodied in his predecessors. Now, if someone wants to make that accusation, you realize that would be an accusation of the most historically significant proportion. You would be accusing one of the successors of St. Peter of being the cause of the division in the church, of which he is the visible sign of unity. This would be the greatest evil imaginable on earth in all of world history, if that was true. Now, if that accusation was going to be made, it would need to be demonstrated that this was in fact the case, that there was an established doctrine or system of doctrine in place and retained among all of the successors of St. Peter, and then at some point there was a separation from that doctrine pursued and promoted by one of the successors of St. Peter. This would need to be demonstrated. It would need to be demonstrated And demonstration means proven to be true with absolute certainty, not suspected, not possible, but absolutely certain. And if there was no demonstration, if there was no absolutely certain proof that this was in fact the case, it would be the most wicked false accusation possible in this life. And there's a reason why we should beware of this accusation. One of the characteristics of the devil himself is that he is identified as the accuser of the brethren. The devil is characterized as a false accuser. False accusation is one of the principal means by which the devil carries out his evil schemes. The Ten Commandments forbid bearing false witness. And the context of the commandment is not simple lying. The context is bearing false witness. That is, making an accusation that is false. In the Old Testament, if a man made a false accusation against another, he was put to death for his false accusation. It was a mortal sin, the false accusation. And what makes a false accusation false is that the accuser has no demonstrative evidence that what he's accusing a person of is in fact true. And therefore, if a person accuses a pope of breaking away from the teaching, the faith of his predecessors, it would be the most devilish and destructive false accusation that anyone could imagine. The most diabolical and evil. An accusation that attacks the head and unity of the church itself, the church for which Christ offered his life. The church which Christ himself said that he would build and lead to victory. And I challenge you with this. If you have ever allowed these kinds of words to come out of your mouth, if you have ever suggested that the Pope or a Pope has in fact apostatized from the faith of Peter and his successors, if you cannot demonstrate that accusation to be true, you are a false accuser of the worst imaginable kind. What kind of demonic insanity would give any person the idea that he should verbalize an accusation like this against the rock on which Christ built the church, the source and sign of unity in Christ's church? If you have ever allowed these words to come out of your mouth and you have no ability to demonstrate the absolutely certain truth of them, you're crazy. You're really insane. You're going to go to your grave guilty of accusing the successor of St. Peter with apostasy, accusing Christ of having fallen to the powers of hell in the church. What kind of arrogant, crazy fool could one be to walk around with this stuff in their head and on their lips, when I guarantee you have no means of providing a demonstration of the truth of those accusations? A bunch of hearsay nonsense you pick up off the internet? Some goofy conspiracy theory that some sophist on YouTube is promoting to get attention so he can sell some goofy book that he wrote? Did you get your copy of, what's the name of Marshall's book? Infiltration? Did you get your copy? It's advertised on every single video. The more attention we can get, the more books we can sell, the more audacious the claims are, the more attention we get, the more books we sell to these fools. Who walk around with accusations against the head of the Catholic Church, the person concerning whom Christ himself made the promise that he would build his church. This goofball with a smartphone watching YouTube videos is walking around talking about how popes have apostatized. You're just nuts. You're nuts. Imagine being summoned into a courtroom where the Pope was being formally tried on the grounds of apostasy, and you come with your mouth babbling all these accusations that you heard on the internet, and they ask you for the evidence on which the assertions that are coming out of your mouth are being made, and all you can offer is some goofy hearsay information that you picked up from a YouTube video or for some book that was printed without approval by the church? Some website article? You're going to present hearsay evidence as your justification for making the accusation? You're crazy. It really is crazy. You wouldn't be allowed to go to court against your neighbor for some common crime unless you had demonstrable evidence that a crime was committed. And yet you're willing to walk around in the streets every day, online, in your house, in the hearing of other people, asserting with no demonstrative evidence that the head of the Catholic Church has apostatized. It's insanity. Evil, demonic craziness. But it's common, just as the Protestant Reformation and all of that craziness was common. It's common. The truth, however, is that it is impossible for the Catholic Church to apostatize. Impossible. And it is impossible for the Catholic Church to be identified apart from its visible head, the Pope on earth. It's impossible for the Church to be spoken of apart from the Pope, and it's impossible for that church to ever apostatize or fail or be overcome by deception or temptation. Christ himself has promised that it would not only avoid being overcome, but that it would actually be victorious by his own saving power. So what does it mean to be infallible? It means that the church can never fail. The church will never be overcome by deception or temptation or any physical threat or attack. The church will never be overcome. But on the contrary, the church will overcome. The church will not only never be overcome, but the church will overcome. And we see this all through church history. We see through the persecutions that the persecutions not only failed to destroy the church, but the church actually grew faster in response to the persecutions and took over the kingdoms in which they were persecuted. And we can look and we can say, well, things sure look difficult right now. But the first thing I have to ask is, according to what evidence? What evidence do you have that the church, the global institution of Christ's church, is struggling? Because your local parish is struggling? Because you've seen a video of some priest in South America juggling in front of the altar, therefore you're making universal statements about the Catholic Church? That's just more of this irrational craziness. Not even rational. Not even serious. Nobody's serious. Nobody thinks that showing an isolated video of some oddball individual priest doing something wacky proves something to be true universally of the church. Nobody believes that. The only people who would believe that or pretend to believe that are evil false accusers. And let me give you an example from Aesop's fables, which warn about this kind of thing. In Aesop's fables, there's one fable of the wolf and the lamb. And there's this lamb innocently drinking at a stream, and a wolf approaches the lamb, and the wolf accuses the lamb of muddying his water. But the problem is that the wolf is actually upstream. And so the first argument that the wolf makes against the lamb is that the lamb muddied his water. And the lamb says, that's impossible because I'm downstream from you. The lamb successfully refutes the wolf's accusation. So then the wolf turns to another accusation. He says, well, I heard that you were speaking falsely about me. You were saying some nasty things about me so many months ago. And the lamb says, I wasn't even alive at that time. I'm only so many months old. You're accusing me of doing something before I was even born. And so finally the wolf says, well, then maybe it was one of your brothers. And the wolf then attacks and kills the lamb. And the point of that fable is that evil people are always looking for an excuse to carry out the evil that they planned from the beginning. The arguments that they present, they don't believe that they're true. They know that they're not true. They're simply pretending to have some justification for the evil that they want to do. And this is what these arguments are against the church. These arguments against the church are like the arguments of the wolf against the lamb. The wolf knows they're not true. The wolf knows they're not reasonable. They prove nothing at all. They're not even possible. And yet the wolf is simply looking to pretend to have a reason to do what he already intended to do, which was to attack the lamb. And this is what these false accusers are doing to the church. The arguments they raise don't even make any sense. They would never allow these arguments in other areas of life. Their arguments, their position, it's full of self-contradictions. And I think they know that, but I don't think they care. I think they're so intent upon speaking blasphemously against the church. They're so deluded by whatever it is that they are motivated by. They're so deluded by it that they don't even care that what they say is reasonable. And I've talked to people like this. I've talked to people who are incapable of reasoning and don't even care anymore if what they say makes any sense, because they're just overwhelmed by some spirit of disobedience and wickedness. The accusations they make, the examples that they give, for example, pointing out to this Pachamama and accusing the Pope of idolatry, it's not even serious. You can't even pretend that Pope Francis at any point was interested in worshiping this wooden image of, what was it called? Our Lady of the Amazon. There is not a single sign at any point that Pope Francis had any interest in offering any kind of worship to this thing. And the event took place 3 years ago, and it's still being talked about in every conversation. In every conversation, if I say something in support of the Pope, I'm asked to explain Pachamama. What is there to explain? You're accusing the Pope of desiring to worship this image that these visitors from the Amazon brought and presented to Pope Francis as a sign of, comparable to the Virgin Mary, which they called Our Lady of the Amazon. And the fact that the Pope permitted the visitors to carry out one of their cultural traditions, this ritual where they celebrate the earth. And he sat there in a chair under a tree while they performed this ritual. As they visited the Vatican, they asked for his blessing. He blessed them. He didn't ask for their blessing. He didn't pray to their God or ask for one of their priests or some religious leader to pray for him. It was a visit to the Pope by a people from the Amazon, and they brought signs and some rituals from their culture to present before him as a cultural visit. And he sat there completely separated from everything that was going on, and he's accused of committing idolatry. It's not even realistic. This isn't serious. This isn't even a reasonable accusation. And these kinds of things are done all the time. Isolated videos passed around the internet to say, look, this is Novus Ordo. This is the Novus Ordo. No, EWTN is an example of the Novus Ordo. Would you like to see the Novus Ordo Mass? Go turn on EWTN. That's the Novus Ordo Mass. Would you like to see the Novus Ordo Mass? Go visit a Dominican monastery and participate in a Dominican Mass. That's a Novus Ordo Mass. Why are you seeking out some isolated Mass that you didn't experience personally, but is being passed around on the internet as if this is something that's present everywhere, when you know it's not present everywhere, which is why you're dependent on these internet videos to make your point. And then you actually make the argument that this, which you know to be is an isolated example that has nothing to do with anything in the church, is a model of the Novus Ordo, or is the intended manifestation of the Novus Ordo Mass. You know that that's not true. And like I said, the Mass on EWTN is a Novus Ordo Mass. Why don't you share that video if you'd like to represent and criticize the Novus Ordo Mass? Just show the EWTN Mass. It's on every single day. Because that's not your intention. Your intention is to try to say something bad about the Church and about the Second Vatican Council, even though what you're saying is irrational. And the fact that a rational human being is not acting rationally suggests that something wicked is going on that's causing this human being to not act like a human being. It's not even rational to suggest that an isolated situation represents a class of things. Not even rational. So it brings us back to the idea of infallibility. And as I said, I was going to address this from a different angle, because what people want to get into is this stupid debate as, oh, well, if the Pope speaks ex cathedra, that's infallible. But if the Pope says something not ex cathedra, then it's no. That's just a bunch of nonsense. The accusations against the Pope are not that he slipped one day and misspoke in a sentence while he was speaking not ex cathedra. That's not even the accusation. The accusation being made is that the Pope is a heretic. That's the accusation being made. It's not some subtle accusation. The accusation is being made by an inferior against a superior with no demonstrative evidence. And then these arrogant people, whether they're writing a letter, a bunch of so-called scholars or theologians, whatever that even means, has nothing to do with the Church. They demand an explanation. They demand a clarification. And the Pope does not respond to them. The Pope is the supreme ruler of the Catholic Church. He's not subject to the desire of some goofy group of scholars, whatever that means. What does that mean? College employees? The Pope is not subject to a bunch of college professors. There are 1 million colleges. Every person who takes a job at a college is all of a sudden a capital S scholar to whom the Pope is accountable to respond when they demand some clarification. These people are nuts. Because you have a job at a college, nobody cares. You don't have some kind of authoritative position in society or in the church because you got a job at a college. Does this apply also to high school teachers, elementary school teachers? There are 1 million colleges. Okay, maybe if you work at Princeton, maybe an elite academic institution, maybe you have some. No, you can work at Okie Doke Catholic College of the Rockies, and because you got a job in the philosophy department, you imagine that you're some kind of doctor of the church. Nobody cares about college professors. The only reason anyone gives attention to college professors is because they need credits to get a stupid degree so they can go get a job, if that even gets them a job. This crazy academic community has just lost all contact with reality. Kids are just trying to get degrees. They're not actually there like you're some kind of great philosophical master. They just need 3 credits, and you happen to be in the way. But this is the kind of stuff we see. And to try to get into these subtle talks about what infallibility means and what it's all nonsense. It's all nonsense. It's all off the mark. We're already off the road to talk about these things. Infallibility is very simple. The church will never fall away from the true faith. The church will never fail. Nothing will separate the church from the love of Christ. It's his bride. He died for the church. Nothing will ever separate the church from him. The church is infallible, indefectible. He will never allow it to fall into error. He will never allow it to be tempted into some kind of apostasy. He died for the church. He came into the world to establish the church, and he's already promised that it will overcome all of its enemies, that hell itself will not prevail against it. The church is incapable of erring significantly because it's protected by Christ himself. The church is not dependent on the excellence of its human officers. It's not dependent on the wisdom of its popes or bishops. It's not dependent on the strength of its members. It's dependent on the wisdom and strength of Christ himself. Christ himself is the power of the church. And just because you don't agree with what the hierarchy has decided, you don't like something that develops in the church's history, it doesn't matter. That doesn't mean that the church is suddenly in crisis and in apostasy because you don't like something. You have no demonstrative evidence for your accusations, and they're extremely grievous accusations. The isolated examples that you bring up are irrational. They prove nothing. They prove nothing, and you know that. And if you're being led to actually act irrationally as a rational creature, you're actually being led to act contrary to your own nature. Something's wrong. Something spiritually is wrong. In the same way that we see Adam and Eve trying to hide from God in the Garden of Eden, and we say, something's wrong. Yeah, something was wrong. They were deluded by the devil and caused to act in ways that aren't even human. And that's what we see among these people making accusations against the Pope and bishops of the church. The church is infallible. It will never fail. It will never err. It's indefectible. It's invincible. And even beyond that, it's guaranteed to be victorious. And anyone who says anything contrary is nothing but a false accuser.